And the flag. High school or elementary, nor their specific content expertise or area to be able to relay that just yet. But that I think is forthcoming.
Wow. Okay. No, I appreciate it. You guys are on it, but it's just a short window to get all that sorted through.
We agree. I will tell you that one of the things, David, that we're doing, Dr. Moore and I actually, and really Dr. Tucker, but we wrangle with this every day and trying to create a process where, by which, no matter how we move, we're able to shift there without a whole lot of stress on our people. And so that's been the true challenge of those puzzle pieces of trying to just iterate over and over again. It's much like what we've trained for a long time is that rapid design. Like we get it, we run it, and as soon as we get to a glitch, we come back around and start again. So we're getting pretty good at that right now because we just keep throwing out new possibilities and then checking it against those teams that Steve showed you at the beginning that we've been running through. We just continue to run it through them. To check out and engage as many people as we can and opinions and inputs as we can to see what will work and what will not work. So, I mean, it helps, but at this point, it's just continuing to be refined. So let me just walk through these instructional frameworks. Part of what, we've been working through is the 3 different types of scenarios from really what would be the most open to the most restrictive, right? And so scenario 1, fully face-to-face, all things go well and, the return guidelines drop off and we're back in. And so that would be everybody in this room's dream, but we recognize that's probably least likely, but still we're planning for that kind of thing. How can we message that out? What are the things that we need to adjust for to make sure that we're safe? Scenario 2 is a process of hybrid, and I'll talk you through that a little bit more with the next slide, but it's that idea that we are somewhat virtual and somewhat face-to-face, but as you know, our heart is leaning into as much face-to-face as absolutely possible. That's really our goal and has always been our goal. And then 3, what happens if we come back to fully virtual? Something happens and we drop back in and we go right back to where we were at the, after spring break. So I wanted to show you this guideline that we got. It's a really great tool to think about it from the Georgia Department of Education, and they spelled it out quite nicely to show you where from scenario 1 to 3, where we are with the most open in that green zone of low to no spread, and we can go back traditional, and we really just work through those preventative practices. And we do those kinds of protocols that allow us to stay safe with our kids, but things are most open. If we go to the opposite end, right, that scenario 3, where it's the most virtual, where we do recognize at some point that we're going to have to go back into distance learning and that we start targeting what we close and looking at how we help students manage their learning, and we help reduce that student capacity load for teachers to make sure that we can maintain the top areas that our survey told us was engagement, right? That's the one thing we have to protect if we end up going back into virtual again. So we've learned through that process. And then in the middle, you almost see a blend of the blend, where we can be a little more traditional, which is kind of what we're shooting for, where we have as much face-to-face as possible, but understanding that we're going to have to roll some things virtual, that we're in a capacity mode. So it could shift us back to, we can only have 50, we're guessing, but say 50% capacity. What happens then if we have to roll a different type of schedule? Are we able to do that without too much stress? And then back to that, really work closer to fully virtual, and we can only have a few people in the building at a time. What does that look like? So let me stretch out our scenarios a little bit further with the fact that we're creating some guides. So we're doing two sides of this. One, an instructional action guide that helps the teachers work through best practices for virtual learning, for hybrid learning, and then if we're back face-to-face, that's a re-entry guidebook that you'll see there that tells them how they should have students hand washing, one way, different types of entries. So we're creating two different guides to share with our staff, one that helps instructional best practices depending on the scenario, and then one helps with those safety protocols that are given to us through our county guidelines. And then last but not least, I think this is about, I wanted you to see one thing that we're really focusing on instructionally. Nick, this will really speak to you in the type of things that we experienced in the COVID. That's that light blue left side where we really just tried to roll our classrooms into online. And we recognized that those types of things didn't work out super well for our kids and our teachers. But moving over to focusing on essential standards, really deeming what needs to be learned and the best way to learn online. Even, for example, your own son taught us that when you're at home and at school, we can make those types of lessons a lot more real world because the kid is at home in the real world as opposed to a schooly type assignment, right? Do I measure something on a computer, or can I actually get a measuring tape and go over to my table and see what the surface area is? So we learned those kinds of lessons coming out of it. Using the same kinds of formats didn't necessarily help us engage because our families were under different stress points, but we do need a little bit more structure to our day to make sure that all kids are engaging at a specific time. So there's a balance between the free for all of you don't have to show up all the time to we need to make sure that you're still learning. It's a lot different in building relationships. That's another example. We've not met our kids before, so if we started fully virtual, we would definitely have to do a different process for building relationships than if you'd been with students for 3/4 of the year, right? So there's a lot of different types of things that we're thinking through, and then our teachers need guides on that. So as you know, we left the school year and then our teachers are on summer. When we bring them back in, it's going to be quick. So we have to rethink our pre-service, for example, and what does that look like to get teachers ready in the event of any of those scenarios kicking in. The other thing we're working really hard with is to try to make sure that we stay within our current footprint, both staff-wise and budget-wise, right? So that adds another type of challenge for us. How can we reutilize staff in a different way that allows us to shift kids back and forth? So those are the kinds of things that we're working through right now. The nice thing is we like puzzles, so this is kind of a fun challenge, but it's got very serious implications to our people. The next thing that we work on is, like Dr. Tucker said, I like Steve Anderson termed this as really our survey strategy. What is it that we're doing and how are we asking people? It's allowing us to then share what we're thinking with our people as we ask the question, right? They know we're thinking about hybrid models coming back in because we asked how they felt about it. So those kinds of things really help us to figure out and message out what we're doing. And then Dr. Tucker's been sending regular communications to our folks about that. And I think that really helps. In some ways, it helps settle some conversations. In other ways, it brings up a lot of questions, as you probably are fielding. The last thing is really the input that we had. I think everyone knows this at this point, but we did a lot of interviews with teachers. We did really, I was up to 21, I think, or 3 student interviews. We're running our innovation and learning coaches are on tap all summer. And then same with curriculum council. So our teacher leaders in curriculum are ready and to make a decision once we decide where we're going. It's really, the nice thing is we've done a lot of pre-work to this. Liberty was set up instructionally to be able to pivot off of essential standards pretty fast. So that's just something that we've already been doing. A big difference from us and a lot of other districts. That was one question that I got asked quite a few times on our Zooms and webinars, that how were we ready to do that so quickly? And it's just the way our system is set up. So I think that leads it to everything. If you have any questions about what we've shared, Steve, anything else to add? I don't.
Yeah, just one other point I was going to make. We were asking earlier about staffing, and we've done the survey work and trying to get a handle on how staff is feeling as we get a little bit further along, kind of on an individualized basis, almost a census of sorts of our staff. And we're also having to do that and looking at ways to do that on the student side. So we've got those survey results, which is helpful, but we really are going to need to kind of hone in on that detail as we move in and through the summer so that we can prepare back to the whole balance of the question of balancing, our staffing challenges, and making sure it'd be great if it all lined up, right? And we just know that's not going to happen in terms of what our staffing challenges are, get balanced against our student challenges. And so I think our hope is as we move a little bit further through the summer, we'll have a better sense of the actual kind of numbers of where people are at. That will help us plan a little bit more specifically for what buildings, what do we need to do at each building, what do we need to do for that virtual situation. And then the other thing I would add, and this is really, I think, maybe an important point as you look at the Clay County guidance as it relates to capacity issues, it relates to what is the impression of districts in general as an essential business. We're really focusing a lot on the distancing kind of strategy, more so than the capacity kind of driver. And I think that's important because it does give us some opportunities to rethink how we use our space. And again, there's some work to do there with the county, but since it's not, the guidance is not very strict when it comes to these issues as it pertains to schools. And so some of our planning is in and around more of that, philosophically in and around distancing and how can we pull that off more so than, 50 or 75% per building or per room or per cafeteria, or, how can we operationally use our space a little bit more creatively to help us kind of manage through these next several months.
And can I add one more thing? I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the things we also are doing, we didn't talk about this, and Dr. Tucker, you can follow up with this too, but we're really also looking at our high risk and special education group. So really trying to pay special attention to those kids that are medically fragile, making sure we identify them and customize what their needs are, and then being able to provide them their equitable access to learning that we know needs to happen. So that is a shift a little bit than what since we're going face-to-face and some virtual, we're able to really do that in a better fashion than when we were all virtual. So I'm working very closely with, and Dr. Moore and I are working very closely with Dr. Martin and Dr. Meisenheimer to attend to those students that are on IEPs and are with 504s, because that was an area that we recognized before was super difficult to attend to. And so we will be working through them student by student, right? We're taking every child one at a time and making sure that we're meeting their needs. So that was another piece that was super important and it's on our mind. I just want you to know that that's a very critical piece for us too.
And even early on when we started kind of thinking about reentry for the fall, and we shared that slide deck with the board and our strategic leadership team, when it got to the academic services implications of reentry, as Dr. Westphal shared, that was one of our two non-negotiables or priorities in terms of ensuring that we're caring for those that are at high risk or most vulnerable, be it students or staff. The second priority is we've tried to design what this could look like, particularly on the face-to-face piece, is that not every family has the privilege of being able to have the flexibility for a spouse to stay home and care for their children in the event that we modify schedules, or we have, days where you're in session face-to-face and other days where you're working remotely. So that resulted in a priority of trying to ensure that we had 100% option for families that needed care Monday through Friday, be it a combination of the classroom experience face-to-face with KidZone or some alternative type of programming, because we know we will have a segment of our population that, again, doesn't have the luxury and consequently has to be at work over the course of their regular day. And so ensuring that those students have an option Monday through Friday was another priority we identified. Within those three categories that Dr. Westfall and Steve shared, from the fully virtual to the hybrid to the fully face-to-face, just know that there are a lot of scenarios that we are continuing to work through in and around scheduling, both at the elementary, the middle, and the high school level, and what that could look like. And so we're working through that in hopes of trying to winnow it down to the scenarios that fit us the best, but then at the same time, allow for the most flexibility for us to be able to kind of enter in and out of the potential of additional shelter in place or learning from home. So appreciate Dr. Westfall, Dr. Moore, Mr. Anderson, and a variety of people, as you can see on the screen, from the teams that are involved in putting their heads together to try to determine the best path moving forward. Any questions around the reentry or summer school item on this morning's study session agenda? Okay, hearing none, then I think that concludes that portion of the agenda. Again, be on the lookout for updates as far as additional detail, as well as some of the finalized plans that Steve mentioned, particularly as it relates to the summer school planning and the guidance in accordance with Clay County, as well as the finalized documentation for activities and athletics that then began again this week at both of our campuses. So you should be seeing those documents here later on in the next couple of days. So I believe that's it for those couple of items, Mr. Rothman.
All right, thank you. That brings us to our last item in the study session, 2.05 job descriptions.
Yeah, as we talked last time, in terms of the adjustments to organizational chart, rebranding academic services to innovation and learning, and the implications for our executive directors moving into those three new roles, Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Design, Assistant Superintendent of Leadership and Learning Communities, and then lastly, that Chief Equity Officer position. We worked through the process of developing the job descriptions that are posted for your review this morning. Administratively, our typical process has been to develop those job descriptions. That's an administrative function. So there's really no formal action that's necessitated or required by the board. But at the same time, as these are three significant changes for our organization, we wanted to design the job descriptions, bring them in front of you this morning for your review. But just know that that is the path that we're headed down in terms of what's contained within those job descriptions. Albeit we don't officially transition to these roles until July 1st. Just know that that handoff or that transition has already begun in terms of plans for the Innovation and Learning Department, but then also plans in and around that Chief Equity Officer role and kicking off with a series of listening and learning tours. So I appreciate our three leaders that are stepping into these new positions as we kind of chart that path moving forward for both the Innovation and Learning Department, but then also how to further the equity work across our district and community. So again, just for informational purposes this morning, and we'll be able to bring more information forward as that informs our strategic initiatives and focus as we enter into the new academic year.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Tucker about the uploaded information on the job descriptions? Well, if there's no questions, then I'm ready for a motion to adjourn.
Andy, I got a question real quick. That's okay, about the next meeting date. I had mentioned I have a conflict on July 21st. I have a proposal. We have a study session that got pushed to July 9th, which is a Thursday. And then we have a regular board meeting on July 21st. Would it be possible to combine those into one meeting on the 14th, which will allow us to meet right before graduation? And then we have a 3-week gap between that and the August date. I'm just curious if the board would be open to that.
Do you want to, should we have Sandra circulate kind of an email to have some preferences on some dates?
Yeah, I think we had not removed the study session in July because we expected there needed to be additional conversation about reentry. So I feel really comfortable with all of our plans and how they're progressing. We just need to hold that out there as a possibility for additional conversation.
I think that's correct. In our conversation that we had, we typically, as you know, forego those study sessions in June, July, and even early August. This is kind of a unique time, so that's why we built those in initially. I think from a calendar standpoint, we can certainly look to the 14th. If we do that and move it that much earlier in July, that creates a little bit further distance to August. And so then August study session, but then also the August board meeting, we can certainly do that.
Or there's a 3-week gap between now and the next regular session. So that it would be, we'd be meeting in 2 weeks. Instead of 3 weeks and 2 weeks, we'd be meeting in 2 weeks and then 3 weeks, I think. Unless I'm missing something. But anyway, just throwing it out there.
All right. How about if I talk to Kim Marie and Dr. Tucker and then maybe have Sandra push something out to see what everybody's availability for the whole month is in case people have some vacations. I know that you've got a conflict that third full week of July, and we'll see what other conflicts we've got with everyone, just so we don't run into any quorum issues. Does that work?
Yeah, just one more comment, Andy. Sorry, I was some technical difficulties here and there. With regards to reentry planning, Jeanette, Academic Services, the entire team, I want to thank you guys for all the effort you're putting into this. This is obviously an unprecedented time, you know, as I tease Kim Marie now more than ever, right? I mean, but this is just kudos on the work and the legwork that you guys have done to get up to speed on where the students are at, where the parents are at, where our educators are at, where the admin is at. I mean, this is a very well thought out plan, and I appreciate everything that's gone into that and helping to learn very rapidly and adjust and make changes. So thank you to everybody involved in that.
AJ Bird, I second that. You're so right, Nick. We appreciate all the work that they're doing.
And a bunch of it's groundwork that was laid over the past 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years that, I mean, so let's not, as I talk to people who are in districts outside of Liberty, they just were caught flat-footed with this, and not surprisingly, but Liberty, the leadership you guys have shown has been incredible.
Yeah, so I would just add, you know, I've been banging the drum about getting community feedback for years, and I just really appreciate that has been, there have been multiple touch points for that, and I just feel like we've changed direction based on some of that feedback. So I appreciate that has become more of a focus.
Thank you, everyone, for that feedback.
All right. Anything else?
Sorry.
Okay. We've got a motion. We have a second.
Second.
All right. Vote, please.
AJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right. We're adjourned. Thank you all. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you, everybody.